This is a deep dive video on a feature that probably won't affect a lot of people in any significant way. And today we're talking about the ribbon feature that's coming to Pokemon Sleep. Welcome back to another Pokemon Sleep video, it's Bro Vinny here. Now this feature was promised several months ago, that if you sleep with your Pokemon a certain number of hours, you will get some benefits. Well, now we have more specific details on what those benefits are and how many hours of sleep you actually need to get those benefits. Now, if you don't know what the feature actually looks like in Pokemon Sleep, you can see it in the Pokemon Sleep ribbon promo video on YouTube. I'll leave a link to this video if you guys want to check it out in the comment section below, but basically this feature, this ribbon will appear in the top right hand side of the stats screen right next to the specialty once it's released. And as a side note, now I didn't actually think about this before, but I think we might get an influx of a certain type of players to the Pokemon Sleep game. And you can find them in the comment section in the trailer. Basically, they're the people called Ribbon Masters. I guess they're players who just collect ribbons or love collecting ribbons in the main Pokemon games. And certainly if you're a ribbon master, one who collect all the ribbons from Pokemon games, you couldn't possibly miss out on the Good Night ribbon. Especially if there's a chance that maybe one day Pokemon Sleep could be linked with Pokemon Home to transfer that ribbon. Now in most Pokemon games, ribbons are largely just aesthetic changes, but in Pokemon Sleep, these ribbons actually have a buff to the Pokemon. The buffs that you can get from the ribbon can be grouped into two lots. One is the buff on fully evolved Pokemon, and the other is the buffs on non-fully evolved Pokemon. Unfortunately, the buffs on fully evolved Pokemon aren't as great as on non-fully evolved Pokemon. So there are 4 levels of the ribbon. Level 1, if you sleep 200 hours with a Pokemon, so that's approximately 1 month, then the Pokemon will just get +1 carry limit. And then at 500 hours, when at level 2, you'll get +2 carry limit, +3 at 1000 hours, and then +2 at 2000 hours. And these are cumulative. So by the time you reach level 4, you will have 8 carry limit increase on your Pokemon. Now to reach level 4, it will take about 6 to 8 months of sleeping with a Pokemon. Of course, depending on how many hours you sleep with Pokemon every day. Now the carry limit buff applies to all Pokemon whether they are evolved or not. But for non-fully evolved Pokemon, they will additionally get a speed buff at ribbon level 2 and 4, basically at 2 months of sleeping or 6 to 8 months of sleeping. If the Pokemon can evolve twice still, like Pichu for example, then it can get 11% frequency reduction, also known as helping time reduction at ribbon level 2, a total of 25% reduction at ribbon level 4. Now to date, I haven't seen any Pokemon where they can evolve twice, where this 25% buff actually makes that Pokemon better than its full evolution. So this 25% buff doesn't really do anything at all. On the contrary, for Pokemon that can still evolve one more time, like Pikachu for example, they'll get a 5% speed buff at ribbon level 2, and a total of 12% speed buff at ribbon level 4. And there are some cases where things have shifted, but it doesn't seem to affect a lot of people. So which Pokemon or which type of player do ribbons actually affect? Interesting point. The first and the most significant effect from the ribbon buff is with Vigoroth. Now, I'm going to assume that you have 2000 hours of sleep on a Vigoroth, otherwise nothing's really changed anyway. And the reason why ribbons affect Vigoroth the most in terms of how the meta changes is currently Vigoroth can evolve one more time to become Slacking. Vigoroth's frequency is 53 minutes 20 seconds. Vigoroth is a berry specialist focused on giving berries, but so is Raticate, and they have the exact same frequency, and they cover the exact same berry type. Of course, Raticate can't evolve again, so relatively speaking, Raticate will get less of the ribbon buff compared to Vigoroth. The advantage of Raticate before this ribbon buff is that it has a self-healing ability. So if you don't have a good healer, Raticate actually produces more berries than Vigoroth, despite it having a higher ingredient rate than Vigoroth which is lower. But if you have a really good healer, then yes, Vigoroth does produce a little more berry than Raticate before the ribbon buff. With the ribbon buff, a 12% reduction on this helping time significantly improves Vigoroth. That Vigoroth is going to be significantly better than a Raticate. Of course, if your Vigoroth is skill focused, and I'm guessing you already know this by now, but if you've got a skill focused build, then you should be evolving it to Slarking, because Slarking, even though by name is a berry specialist, it is actually a skill specialist. Its frequency slows down to over 1 hour, but it has a huge skill trigger rate, making it an ingredient magnet specialist more than it is a berry specialist. But if you are evolving into Slarking, then the ribbon buff doesn't actually give the speed boost. If you ask me, I'm not sure I want to spend 7 months forcing myself to sleep with Vigoroth every single day just to get that 12% only for a new berry Pokemon to be released, and then it gets power creep, so then it's kind of useless. So this one's a tough decision. I don't feel like recommending people focus on Vigoroth as the berry specialist from now on for normal type berries, but it is likely going to be the clear winner for normal type berries. The second Pokemon this update will likely affect is Witch Hat Pikachu or Halloween Pikachu. Now this Pikachu doesn't evolve in Pokemon Sleep, so I'm not sure if it will have the ability to gain that 12% speed boost, because canonically Pikachu can evolve, but mechanically in this game it does not. So based on the ribbon, will it or will it not get a buff? That is yet to be seen. If I were to take a guess, it probably won't get the buff, just to be consistent with the game. But I'd be very upset because I myself actually have an excellent Halloween Pikachu. Now the thing about Halloween Pikachu is that it is still a berry specialist just like regular Pikachu, but it has a slightly better frequency. It also has a very slightly better skill trigger rate. So if we're comparing Witch Hat Pikachu to regular Pikachu, Witch Hat Pikachu actually wins. Now it isn't better than a Raichu in any way. A Raichu has an even lower frequency and an even higher skill trigger rate. But the reason why we sometimes talk about Witch Hat Pikachu is because if you're using it with the legendary Raikou, then the helper boost is stronger when you have different species of Pokemon. And Pikachu and Witch Hat Pikachu and Raichu, they count as 3 different species. So before this ribbon update, Witch Hat Pikachu plus Raichu count as 2 different species and can be used in a Raikou team for overstacking. Now, overstacking ignores the frequency of your Pokemon. Overstacking meaning that you're building up the berries for the next week. You're sacrificing the current week, but you're building your berries or your ingredients for the next week. So Helper Boost doesn't care about the frequency of the Pokemon. As long as you got a number of different species and the species are of the same level, let's say they're all level 55, then the berry strength will be the same. However many Greppa berries Helper Boost will get from Raichu will be the same on Witch Hat Pikachu. So the main benefit of using Witch Hat Pikachu is from a day-to-day use of Raikou. So in other words, not overstacking, because that means that your Witch Hat Pikachu not only buffs the Raikou for its main skill, but also are producing berries quicker than a regular Pikachu. Of course, with the ribbon update, regular Pikachu is likely going to be faster. Right now, Witch Hat Pikachu has about a 4% improvement in the frequency compared to regular Pikachu. But if a regular Pikachu obtains that 5% speed buff with 500 hours slept, then they're going to be largely the same. And then at 2000 hours, it will be significantly better by about 8% than a Witch Hat Pikachu. So there's a very slight shift here in which type of Pikachu you're going to use to help Raikou's main skill. Now I know that not a lot of people actually run Raikou because it's rare to find and also because its skill isn't easy to execute. But to those of you who this does affect, there's a slight shift in thinking depending on whether Witch Hat Pikachu will get that ribbon buff. The third type of Pokemon that this affects are the Paldean starters. And that's because the Paldean starters change type when they evolve to their final form in Pokemon Sleep. So if you were after an extra water team member for say your Suicune helper boost, or an extra fire team member for your Entei helper boost, Crocodile and Quaxwell with Ribbon Boost would buff the entire situation. Once again, Helper Boost itself ignores the frequency of the Pokemon in overstacking. It's more the day-to-day use of Helper Boost that the frequency would make a difference, because this Pokemon itself is farming more productions. Of course, we don't yet have a grass legendary, so Floragato isn't in this discussion. But if potentially there's a future grass type helper boost, then Floragato would be viewed in the same way. And the fourth type of Pokemon this affects are Pokemon that people just love using unevolved. And my favorite example is Cookie here, who is Lorabella's shiny Eevee that she caught way back in September 21st, 2023. This Eevee is busted. It's got helping bonus, skill trigger, inventory is fine as well, helping speed and helping speed. And I guess for a shiny Eevee it was too difficult to decide which evolution to go for. And in the end, she had settled on not evolving the Eevee and just fed it 5 main skill seeds and use it as an ingredient magnet specialist. It has 1,000 hours racked up in sleeping time, and it's only another 1,000 to get the maximum buff with the ribbon bonus. And I can tell you that with the 12% ribbon bonus, even though it doesn't beat Vaporeon, Eevee can come really close. So if it were me, I wouldn't bother evolving this Eevee at all, especially with 2,000 hours a level 4 ribbon. It's definitely no coincidence that the Goodnight Ribbon promo video showcases Eevee as a motif throughout the entire video. By the middle of the video, you'll see a ribbon on Eevee's ear. So did the developers design the ribbon with Eevee in mind as a Pokemon that many people have indecision about which evolution to go for? Perhaps they did, and it's a way for them to give Eevee a chance to just be itself. And then there's 2 other Pokemon that this frequency change also affects, but not in any meta shifting way. And they are Onix. Onix actually with 12% speed buff becomes faster than Steelix, who on evolution just goes down by 1 minute in its frequency, down to 50 minutes. So 12% improvement on an Onix is much faster than Steelix. The catch though is that they do different berries. In fact, they are still the only rock and steel berry specialist in the game. So the evolution just changes what they do. It's not like they are comparable anyway. So if anything, I would think of this ribbon as a pure buff to Onix, not that it beats Steelix, because they do different things. However, if you're using Onix or Steelix as a not favorite berry, Onix with a 10% speed buff represented here with nature being brave actually produces more berry strength than Steelix. Now, of course, it's even better than 10% because Ribbon level 4 is 12% speed buff, but I just don't have a way to represent it on the calculator right now. Regardless, even with 10% speed buff, it's already producing more berry strength than Steelix. Just marginally, but it is more. So if you're actually using Onix off-type, not favorite berry, it's better to actually not evolve it, assuming you've got those 2,000 hours. Now, of course, I understand that a lot of people don't actually have an Onix. It's very hard to find one, and let alone catching a good one. So this is purely theoretical. I myself don't have a good Onix. Although what I don't like about this is that if I did actually sleep with Onix for 2,000 hours in this game, I don't think I'll ever evolve it to Steelix. Because I don't want to not be able to go back to having a rock berry specialist and have it lose that 12% buff on evolution, and actually the frequency going down, and actually the frequency getting worse. So the only way for me to decide what to do with Onix is I'm hoping for a new Pokemon to be released that covers either rock or steel berries. That way I can assign a better role for Onyx, whether it should just focus on rock berries or if it should go to steel berries. So following that thinking, my only advice is don't evolve your Onyx if you've got a really good one until we figure out whether there's going to be a Pokemon that covers either rock or steel berries, so that Onyx doesn't have to do one of those two roles. And the final Pokemon of note with this update, and again it doesn't really affect or change the meta in any way, is Swablu. Swablu with 12% speed buff actually becomes faster than Altaria. Yes, Altaria is quite slow. Of course, the catch is that Altaria does something totally different. It is a Dragon Berry specialist. So it's not comparable anyway, and Dragon Berry is the strongest berry in the game. So the berry strength helps compensate for that slow frequency. So while it's an interesting note, it doesn't actually change anything. If we were to compare it to the alternative flying type berry specialist, Dodrio, Swablu still doesn't come anywhere close to beating Dodrio. So Swablu is just too slow to be used as a flying berry specialist even with the buffs. And finally, I just want to summarize the effects of the carry limit increase for all Pokemon that have ribbons. This carry limit increase benefits more skill and ingredient specialists. The +8 inventory by ribbon level 4 means that skill specialists will have more chance to skill trigger. Unless you're collecting very often, then it doesn't affect you. But if you're using a skill specialist overnight, then it has a bigger chance to trigger in the morning. In fact, it has 2 chances to trigger in the morning, given that skill specialists are getting a buff to be able to hold 2 skills at a time. Of course, ingredient specialists also getting buffed because if you're sleeping with an ingredient specialist, it will be able to farm more ingredients, which is what it's good at. But equally, if you're just farming during daytime and you're collecting often, then it doesn't really affect you that much for ingredient specialists. On the contrary, for berry specialists, relatively speaking, it's slightly nerfed and slightly buffed at the same time. It's nerfed because sneaky snacking mechanic is not as good with a large inventory. But it is buffed if you think of it as carrying more stuff for the new week from Sunday to Monday, or if you've got a high skill level on your berry specialist. Let's say you've got a Walrein that has level 6 main skill, or maybe a level 7 charge strength S for Alligator, then it has more chance to trigger those skills from overnight sleeping. So it's both a buff and a nerf, so I'd say the effects are mild for berry specialists with the carry limit increase. Although this does change our thinking slightly on what Pokemon to sleep with, considering that if you only ever sleep with berry specialists, your ingredient and its skill specialists aren't going to get ribbons as quickly. And lastly, I think that it's important to note that 2000 hours is a lot of time and things can change by 2000 hours. If you're really worried about that extra 2 inventory, just be aware that between 1000 hours and 2000 hours, the Pokemon that you've been sleeping with this whole time might become irrelevant. So I wouldn't think of ribbon as a priority stat to have for a Pokemon. It's a nice additional benefit if you happen to sleep a lot with that Pokemon. And the good news about this feature is that it's actually relatively more beneficial to free-to-play players, because free-to-play players largely use the same team from week to week. For example, Piggy carries her Raichu to every island she goes to because, well, she just doesn't have a lot of berry coverage, so she just uses a powerful Raichu everywhere she goes. Whereas for myself, I'm constantly changing teams to try and match the favorite berry, but that means all my sleeping hours are split amongst a lot more Pokemon. So in conclusion, my favorite part about this feature isn't actually about any meta shifting at all in this game. My favorite part about this feature is that you can use your unevolved Pokemon and they will do you more good than they did before. And Cookie here is the case in point. Thank you for watching, guys. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe.